Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Whiskey Wednesday. I mean, Workflow Wednesday with your host, none other than yours truly, Fusion Phil, over here at jitcadcam. I am going to give this a couple of minutes as we've kicked this off. We've started these a little bit earlier. It tends to help you guys get in here quickly and not miss anything in the beginning. It also gives me a chance to check out chat, make sure that I'm sounding all right to everybody, and that, as my chat knows, you guys can ask questions at any time. You could also point out anything that you think I'm doing wrong, like not sharing my screen or lost audio along the way. So let's go ahead and dive right into, as the title slide says, yet the description was wrong on this one, guys, is we're going to look at the secrets of programming turning toolpaths. Now, these secrets go far and vast to everybody and anybody. I know if you clicked on my post on the Facebook page, jokingly, even as an advanced user, you can learn something. But I want to point out this one thing. Fusion tends to want to do the right thing initially when you create a toolpath. As well, anytime there's problems with these toolpaths, you're going to notice everything tends to color code or align to a couple of simple rules. So let's start with my favorite rule that I always teach people and I always point out, and that is we want to use the OK button as soon as possible on a toolpath. Now, you guys are all going to notice I have my stock set up here. For the sake of this part, I also have a section view populated. Now, if you don't know how to do this, I'm happy to help you guys make some other videos on this stuff. But I'm going to go up, and in most cases, we always want to face off our part. So I'm going to grab that facing toolpath here, and we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And what you're going to notice, like I said, guys, Fusion has a tendency to want to do what's right. Now, if it's missing information, it will direct you to said missing information. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this a turning tool to go ahead and turn for that facing. And just like that, we have literally generated our first toolpath, right? So you notice all I did was pick a path, I've hit OK, and now I've got my toolpath. Now, this is where I like to point out to people the color coding system. And what I'm going to do for this part is we're going to go ahead and turn off the rest material, and you guys can start to see the way the color coding system works, right? So if we think about this, is we have blue, green, yellow, and from time to time, red. What does that mean on a scale of color coding? Well, if we go ahead and open back up our toolpath here, what you're going to notice is up here at the top, our passes tab reflects everything blue. Our linking tab over here is going to reflect anything that's green and yellow. A little hard to see out there. But if we ever want to modify something here, and you're going to see this where we walk through a couple of roughing and finishing toolpaths, is if I want to change the number of blue lines or how the blue lines interact with my part, simply enough, I just go to the tab with the blue lines. And in this case, maybe we want to make a couple of step overs. And as you guys are going to see here, just by turning on calculate number of step overs, we've now modified how many blue lines we're getting, right? We could always adjust, how much of a step over and things of that nature. But this mindset to give you guys these secrets is all built around the idea of where to go to modify what we want to do, right? Facing is super easy in the world of Fusion on the lathe. So let's jump into something a little more complex. As you guys have saw me start this off, I'm going to go ahead and go with my roughing toolpath. In this case, we don't have to give it a tool because it's going to reuse the same tool, but I am going to hit that OK. Now, as you're seeing, we have a lot of things happening on our part, right? So as you can see, our blue lines are now extending all the way down to the backside of our part. We're also getting a undercutting or a waterfalling effect. And this is where, again, we can play that exact same game as you guys saw before. Now, in the case of this part, I may actually only want to turn it so far down to my part. So what I like to do is play the game of Z and X, right? I want to change my toolpath in Z, or I want to change my toolpath in X. Using this next tip that I love to give to people is we always want to work in, a top to bottom, left to right workflow. And that's why our next tab is going to be the geometry tab. And in this geometry tab is exactly that. We are defining where we want our toolpath to be in the Z axis, right? So if I was to come out here and I was going to say my back reference, I want to go ahead and do a selection. And now I can select, and I'm going to rotate my part a little bit here, and you guys can see I can pick this edge or I can pick this face. And what that has now done is changed in my Z how deep my toolpath is going to go, right? So what we're going to expect to happen is this kind of nonsense back here is going to be removed by nothing more than defining how far in on Z do we want our toolpath to go. Now, here's a little bit of a snippet for some of you out there. Again, using that same mindset. We're not concerning ourselves with how many blue lines we have or how those blue lines interact or are yellow and linking. All we're doing is thinking in the Z-axis or the X-axis of our part, right? So again, is if I go back and I want to modify this one more time, again, based on where do I want to start? Yes, we faced off this part. We may not actually want to face off this part, and you'll see why in a second. So maybe I want to start my front out at the stock front in this case. So again, as we can go ahead and change to stock front, and now by hitting OK, you're going to notice that toolpath goes all the way down the front of my part, right? Now, we will be doing some different things here with this as we progress further. A lot of you out there may drill this part. We're going to talk more in boring here in a few minutes on why the X diameter matters. But again, as you're seeing, maybe I don't want my blue lines to go horizontal on my part. I would like them to go vertical. Right now, we're changing how the blue lines are populated on my part, which is my passes tab, of course. So again, we could say, you know, I want vertical passes. Now, somebody out there always says, you know, maybe I wouldn't do that part that way. That's fine, guys. But the idea is how to look at your toolpath. Get that toolpath on your part so then you can modify it accordingly, right? So if I was to redo that toolpath one more time, again, looking at our toolpath, how my blue lines are interacting for this undercutting is exactly the same concept, right? So we go to our blue lines. In this case, I'm going to turn off grooving, don't allow grooving. And what you'll see now is we're going to run down our part to a point and stop. Now, based on how our stock size does affect everything that's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my stock size here so you guys can see a little bit better of an example. Maybe this is a 2.6 diameter part. And now from that, if I regenerate my toolpaths, what you'll see is that toolpath now runs all the way down the length of the part. Again, we're seeing the actual stock versus the model recognition of our toolpath. And again, that waterfalling toolpath we don't have. So I would recreate that one more time. And this is just to give you guys that reference, right? Like we're waterfalling into our part, we're diving into our part. So again, the idea is just simply enough, put a toolpath on the part. Let's say we want to go in and do some grooving now. So grooving, I think a lot of times confuses people, but it works the same exact strategy going in here. I pick my OD grooving tool in this case. I go ahead and hit OK. And now magically it's doing the entire part, right? So what I would like to do is, again, constrain possibly in Z or constrain in X to narrow down where my blue lines are going to go, right? We're not changing how the blue lines work, but where the blue lines are going to, right? So again, if I wanted to, knowing that we turned based on this OD up here on our part, I'm going to start with my Z. Again, I say selection. I would like to groove between this edge. And again, we could do selection and this edge. And now, again, I hit OK. And you're going to notice we're now within those two barriers. And now I don't want to start all the way out here at my stock OD. So we could start to do things, again, constrained now in radii, right? So my outermost could be selection. Again, I'm going to use one of those edges to set that diameter. And now you're going to notice that toolpath has shrunk down. And now my lead in starts to where my cutting toolpath begins. Now, there is a little bit of a caveat to this. And this is another really good secret when you guys are doing this type of stuff inside of Fusion, is if I went back and did turning groove again, and again, we're going to let it do everything, right? I am going to move this toolpath up. And the reason why I'm going to move this toolpath up is because in my actual Z containment, I have what's called rest machining. Now, rest machining can be your absolute best friend, and it can be a complete nightmare depending on what you're doing with your part. But as you're going to see, if we were to use that mindset of a top to bottom workflow, rest machining is one of the last things we would toggle on. However, I'm going to let this thing naturally do what it thinks to do, just so you guys can see how this is affecting everything, right? So based on we haven't done a finished toolpath, rest machining is automatically recognizing that I may want to use that tool again to do an OD profile around my part. And if I was to turn off my part, you would see more of that toolpath, of course, and we could even get the spun profile out of the way. But because it still thinks there's material around the outside of our part, now it's trying to do all those additional areas. However, had I used that kind of system as we've talked about here and started from the top, and I may have done my selection here or my selection here. Now, keep in mind, the reason why I'm showing you this to you guys is you may want to do a finished toolpath later after the fact that you've roughed out that part because, you know, you may need rigidity in your part. Now, again, using rest machining, it has actually narrowed down my grooving for me automatically. So it's not having to go adjust my X diameter. So again, that workflow becomes very, very clean if you guys want to see this from the top. Now, I'm going to move a little fast on this one, but if I was to jump over and say, you know what, I want to machine again between this edge and this edge. And with that, I would like to turn on rest machining because I want it to go out and find everything. One, we're going to get an error because we've already machined that area out. So let's drag that toolpath up real quick and regenerate it, right? So as you can see, without ever having to get to X diameter and constrain those where those blue lines are at, I can automatically do that again using rest machining. So let's change it up. Let's shift gears. I see a lot of you guys out there. Thanks for joining us. Let's switch over to boring. Now, boring is boring nonetheless, but a lot of you out there are all the same, right? We're going to pre-drill our part. I'm going to go out and see what kind of drill bit we have. We have a 21/64 in this case. I am going to select my whole face here, and I'm going to kick on auto merge segment. Now, for drilling, things get a little different, and I am going to make a video next Wednesday talk more about milling, but you're going to notice is one, you still have your tool. We've now gained the multi-axis tab. Again, we're going to visit this a little later, but when we talk geometry, we actually are talking X, Y. We're not talking Z. So it's backwards when you get into a mill toolpath versus a lathe toolpath, but our heights tab is now where we constrain our Z, right? So as you guys saw, I went ahead and used in geometry auto merge to bring that up to the top. And then I may want that hole to go down through the bottom. This is not rocket scientists. At the end of the day, drilling tends to be pretty easy. But what I'm really looking for is when we start to look at our spun profile and our rest material. I think yours truly turned off the actual material. Oh, nope, we're dealing with some calculations. I'm going to delete those out of the way. There we go. And let's get that out of there. So as you can see now, we have our drill coming in and drilling out that profile. And then there's still material left here for our boring operation. So again, we go to our turning profile rough. Again, whatever I do in rough, guys, transfers directly over to finish. So I'm going to grab my boring tool. And as you guys know, we're going to hit OK. Now, I didn't hit OK initially. I went and found the tool. Then I hit OK. Again, you're going to develop that workflow where you notice you could do several steps in one shot, but the idea is still the same. The secret to creating any toolpath in Fusion all relies on one, get a path on your part. Even when I do 5-axis machining, I do a 3-axis toolpath, then convert it to 5-axis. So I can at least see where those blue lines are. Now, for those of you that don't know, when you're going in and doing turning, obviously we've pre-drilled this. We never want to start on center. So again, we need to think, do I want my blue lines to stay in the Z area that it's working? In this case, yes. So I need to change my X and how my X is affected. So again, we go in. My Z is not going to change in this case. We could make it go a little bit further back past the back of our part, but I'm going to go to radii. Now, here's, kind of my third secret to a lot of people. Every time you're doing a path with turning, outside in tends to be the strategy. And again, you work with that top to bottom workflow. The only time that flips is when we work inside out, right? So I like to tell people is if you look for inner radius, this is your innermost point. Now, by default, it is stock ID. In this case, we're using a solid blank. Now, if we were using tubing, it would have picked up on that tubing, which would have made things a lot easier for us. But the guy in purchasing didn't think about that when he bought us that drop with the terrible cut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to diameter, and then I can type in my drill bit. So in this case, I do have additional options turned on, and you guys can turn these options on in your preferences. So I know that diameter is going to be 61 64ths. So again, cool thing with Fusion, if you guys didn't know, you could actually do math inside these windows. As you see, that blue line is now automatically populated, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So I do see Travis out there. 100% you like to use the diameter as well, as you're seeing here. Hello from Texas and Canada. That's awesome to see you guys all across the US. I'm pretty much next to Canada, by the way. But as you're seeing, we have now constrained how those blue lines and where those blue lines are going. But there is one caveat to this, because the yellow and the blue lines still fall into that idea of containment in Z and X, right? So as you're seeing is where our clearance is currently set, and we'll change this in a minute, it's still feeding in on center line of this part, especially when it comes in for its first move. And then as it retracts out on that final move, it still comes back to center. And this is probably the number one question I see, because we could hit the backside of our tool. So again, as we want to change how those blue, yellow, and green lines, where they're relying on our part, where they're falling. So what I'm going to do is on my clearance, I'm actually going to reference inner radius. And what inner radius is this guy right here. And now you've noticed this orange line has now started to open up. With that, I'm going to go ahead and change it from 400 to 40. And now you're going to notice is my blue line and my orange line, right? So my orange line is where we're always going to create our clearance from. And when I hit OK, you're going to notice now my yellow line has started much further out. Again, we wrap it into our part. We've done our first couple of paths. Now we're done with our part. We come back out, and we've never had to worry about the backside of our tool hitting. And we're starting everything from the diameter of the drill we used prior to. So I see Travis out there. He finds it especially handy when you're doing small bores and worried about clearance. 100%. I cannot stress that enough, is being able to get that to go all the way in and start with that diameter you've already created. So again, as you guys are seeing, is the key elements here are always the same. And I think a lot of people sometimes do get confused with this, is we want to work in basically a simple system of 3 steps, right? Our tool, where our path goes, right? So we want to get our path and our X and our Z. And then lastly, let's change how our path and how all of our rapids and retracts are going to affect everything. Again, if I was to create a finishing toolpath, I'm pretty sure you guys have all seen this lovely error at the end of the day. So let's go ahead and do turning profile finish. And we've got our error. Of course, we're going to drag this up to put it in the right order. And that error is lead out has been modified, right? So again, this is where if we're using the color coding of our toolpath, so let's go ahead and get some stuff out of the way, is our blue line comes up and around, and then we transfer from a feed rate to our rapid or our linking moves. So we need to modify, in order to get rid of that error, our lead out. So again, as I go into Fusion, I need to change my yellow line. So I go to my linkings tab. And in this case, you could either do a radial extension, which will bring that toolpath vertically out, or you could allow it to cut the stock, which means it's going to put on automatically whatever your lead out settings are. So if I add a radial extension, as you're going to see, we now have created that radial extension. Then we've created our lead out. And as you can see, I've no longer get my actual error. So with that, guys, I hope this helps you guys a ton with creating your turning toolpaths. I do have to give you the old pitch like always. If you guys enjoy this content, by all means, hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and share this content at any time when you think somebody can use it. As well, we are an Autodesk reseller out here. We do have a promo right now for 20% off all of our services. Now, the beer itself, if you are buying me a beer, is still $3. I think regular price is $5. But with that said, you guys can support our channel in a lot of different ways. In any way you feel necessary, we're always happy to help. And you can even use the support email down below to go ahead and put in those support tickets. Now, I do want to tell you guys, we will be live once again Friday with our free Support Friday sessions. You're all more than welcome to come out to that as well. I did just see another thing come in from Travis. Let's see what's going on. Got something I ran into that you could maybe give me some help on. An O-ring groove that has a tapered floor. So I do know about that, Travis. I appreciate that completely. And I will say that would be a good question for Friday. But I did want to put grooving in here. Now, grooving at an angle is a whole nother story inside of Fusion, and I think I'm going to make a specific Workflow Wednesday for that. So as always, guys, it's not what you know, it's who you know. You know Phil over here at jitcadcam. I hope you guys all have an outstanding and great rest of your day, and thanks for coming to my live session.